Good evening, and once again, welcome to Cyclone InCyders alongside Matt Van Winkle. I'm your host, Aaron Bauer, and tough weekend for the Iowa State men's and women's basketball teams. Both teams eliminated from tournament play. Iowa State able to get by the first round as they took down Connecticut Thursday night. The women fell in the first round of Green Bay. We'll touch on that in our second segment. But first, the Iowa State men. In that Connecticut game Thursday night, probably played the best 10 minutes of basketball they've played all season. It really kind of shocked, I think, Connecticut. Yeah. Really wasn't expecting that from Iowa State. But they did play well and got the W and had the chance to move on.
Iowa State really came out on fire. They were shooting the ball well. Then later in the second half, they kind of let Connecticut come right back into it. And we thought, you know, we've seen this from Iowa State before this season. We don't want to see it again, especially in the NCAA tournament. But I really think we saw what this team was made of. Came out strong in the second half. And really played a great game of basketball. Ended up winning that one by double digits. So great win for Iowa State in the NCAA tournament. Now they can say that. Fred Hoiberg can put that on his resume that he's won an NCAA tournament game. And so can all these players.
It's good for guys like Scott Christopherson. Chris Allen's a guy that's been there before. But Melvin Edgel, that's going to give him confidence coming back to Iowa State. Scott Christopherson, good to see a senior get into the NCAA tournament. Not only just get there, but actually get a W and move on to the bracket. And move on is what they did. And maybe not the best draw when the brackets came out on Selection Sunday. No, the number one overall seed, Kentucky, was the number one seed awaiting them. And as you see the score right here, unable to get the W in that one. It really had the game at 42 apiece, about first media timeout in the second half. But then Kentucky showed why they were the number one overall seed, went on a 22-4 run and shot lights out all game.
Well, absolutely. Iowa State, as you mentioned it, they got the score pretty close there in the second half, but Kentucky just showed their dominance. They've got, 3-4 guys that are probably going to make the NBA coming, so many good players on that team. Coach Calipari's got those guys playing great basketball. I have them winning in my bracket, Kentucky. I just think they're the unanimous number one seed coming into this tournament. As you can see, they're shot 55%. Iowa State wasn't too far behind them, but as you can see, we don't have the set up there, but Iowa State only made 3 3-pointers in that game, and that was really ultimately what lost them that game, is they couldn't hit from beyond the arc, which is what's been keeping them in the games this season.
And Scott Christopherson said their whole game plan was to let Kentucky shoot outside the arc, and they let them shoot, and Kentucky buried just about every single one of them.
And Calipari even said that after the game, that's probably the best basketball his team's played. And when they're playing their best basketball, it's going to be really tough.
And Marquise Teague, the point guard for Kentucky, had a career-high 24 points. But really the storyline coming out of Louisville, everybody thought Kentucky was going to move on, which they did. But a storyline I think a lot of people were surprised to see was the play of Royce White. Really caught a lot of people's attention, the way he dominated Drummond for Connecticut and really kind of dominated Anthony Davis for Kentucky. Anthony Davis did go on and have his 15 points and really show why he's probably going to be the player of the year. But Royce, as you take a look at his season average right here, 23 points in the loss to Kentucky, and most of them have him as a first-round draft pick now.
Oh, absolutely. Coming into the NBA or to the NCAA tournament, people weren't really sure if Royce was going to go to the NBA next year, and I think his performance in the NCAA tournament probably does solidify him a spot, maybe in the first or second round. Definitely a lottery pick, in my opinion. But I'd hate to see Royce go this early. I think he's got a lot to work on with his game. He's a great post player. I think he's got a little bit more moves to develop, and I think he really needs to improve his shot. And another year with Fred Hoiberg, I think, will definitely help him with that. I'd like to see Royce stay another year, but, that's ultimately up to him. And he said that Coach Hoiberg's going to give him some advice as well. Coach Hoiberg, very well-rounded up there in the NBA, knows a lot of guys, so he's going to get good input from Coach Hoiberg. What do you think, Aaron? Do you think Royce is going to stay another year?
Like you said, as Cyclone fans, of course, we would love to see him stay. Sure. I honestly think he really should stay as well. The facts that you put forward just a minute ago, he has no jump shot really. He can knock down. He has been getting better at his free throws, but really he needs to develop a jumper from the elbow to the free throw line if he's going to be a productive NBA player. That's something he hasn't really shown this far. I go back to the Kansas game, I think it was, or the Baylor game, one of those times. He's knocked down his first free throw line jumper, and then they just dared him to shoot after that, and he wasn't able to knock him down. So.
And that brings up a good point. I think Royce really just needs to build confidence, and I think another year with Iowa State will help him build that confidence. Jump into the NBA can be pretty tough on some guys. We've seen a lot of guys struggle after that first year in the NBA. So I think another year with Coach Hoiberg, you got Clyburn, you got Lucius coming in next year. You got Scotty and Chris Allen leaving, But I think those guys will really help this team move forward, and after they've lost those two seniors.
And, those two coming back, Corey Lucius is more of the true point guard that Iowa State was really missing this season. And as he's going to be able to make Royce White do different things. Royce White isn't going to have to bring the ball up every time as a power forward. That might be his best part of his game. It's going to give him a chance to come off screens, work on that jump shot like I really think he needs to do. But you got to remember, Iowa State was kind of in this scenario, probably 3-4 years ago with Craig Brackins.
Right.
Craig Brackins, projected lottery pick, come out his junior year, decides to come back for his senior year, and really hurt his draft stock his senior year.
Yeah.
Didn't have the numbers, didn't have the points and all that his senior year. He still, got drafted and everything, but wasn't as high. So now there's an argument why Royce White should really go now when he's a first-round pick.
And that's the thing. Brackins really needed to work on his game, which he did. And after that, he didn't have the greatest junior season, but, he still was a first-round pick in the NBA draft, got drafted by Oklahoma City, I believe it was. But I think you're right. I think Royce White really needs to find an identity to me. As you said, he's kind of that point forward player. He brings the ball up the court every once in a while. But I think if he really wants to have a solid NBA career, he's probably just going to want to stick on being a forward and have a good shot from the outside. We've seen, a lot of forwards in the NBA have good shots, but I think he needs to work on both aspects.
It's going to be interesting. So you got to remember, he's still a young kid.
Right.
He does have a kid of his own. So that's one thing you got to remember.
Sure.
Raising a family, he has to have the money come in to support that family. But I really do think, I think he's going to be back. I think he's going to have another year to grow at Iowa State. And you got to remember that anxiety problem he does have. Right. Like you said, unable to fly down to Louisville. His grandfather drove him down there. And that's going to be one thing he's going to really become comfortable with Ames, and maybe he can help. And, in the NBA, you're not going to be able to drive each and every night to your basketball games.
Right, and I think Fred Hoiberg will definitely assist Royce White in this decision. It's not going to be an easy one. I think we'll probably expect it here in the next week or two. I think the deadline for him to join or to declare for the NBA draft is something around April 10th or somewhere around that first week of April. So I think we're going to be hearing that decision here pretty soon. We'll have all the more information as that information develops. So
whether Royce White stays or go, one thing is for sure, Iowa State is going to be playing basketball again next year, and it's going to be a new team. You got Edgum, Booker, Babb coming back, who was scoreless in that Kentucky game. Another big reason I think they lost that one. But Corey Lucius, Will Clybourne, some say he's the biggest NBA prospect.
A couple of new freshmen coming in that are really high.
Georges Niang out of Detroit will come in. Percy Gibson coming back, who showed good minutes for Fred Hoiberg. Absolutely. So what's your expectations going into the offseason here and coming back? And Iowa State may be one of the early favorites to take the Big 12 next year.
Well, it's going to be interesting, as we said, that Corey Lucius is going to be that team's point guard this year. So they're really going to have to change their offense a little bit. After losing another shooter in Scott Christopherson, they gain another one in Will Clybourne, who at Utah was a great shooter. So I think that's going to help this team a lot. Going to be interesting to see, as we mentioned, if Royce White comes back, that's going to really change their post presence. Didn't see a lot out of Anthony Booker this year down low. Really kind of showed us that he can be a shooter, which is nice too. But if this team wants to improve, as you mentioned, Percy Gibson is a guy that's going to need to step up down low. Guys like Jordan Rayleigh even didn't see a lot of minutes this year. But if Royce White decides to leave, he's going to be a key part in next year's team because he brings that height. Not very physical guy, but he's going to be a tall guy, be able to pull in those rebounds.
Who do you think's really going to grow the most from this Cyclone basketball team over the offseason going into next year?
That's a really good question. I'm not really sure. Maybe Chris Babb, as you mentioned, didn't have any points in the game against Kentucky. I'd really like to see Babb work on his shot in the offseason. We saw him really do well in the beginning of the season, getting about 15 points a game, 10, 15 points. Really started to slow down offensively, but that's when his defensive game stepped up. I'd like to see a little bit more balance out of Chris Babb next year. I think in the offseason, working with Fred Hoiberg, as I mentioned, great coach to have if you want to be a shooter in the NBA. I think Chris Babb's got a future in the NBA. He's got to work on his jump shot, though. Another
guy you got to remember coming off the bench this year was Tyrus McGee. Gave great minutes for Iowa State. He'll be back next year for his senior season. Another great shooter that Fred Hoiberg's going to have in his arsenal. Got to take our first break here on Cyclone InCyders. Coming up next, we'll talk to the women's basketball team. They were eliminated from the NCAA Tournament by number 7 seed Green Bay. We'll touch on that game, as well as look forward to next year for them. Stay tuned. You're watching Cyclone InCyders. And welcome back once again to Cyclone InCyders alongside Matt Van Winkle. Second segment here on Cyclone InCyders, we're going to take a look at the Iowa State women's basketball team knocked out of the NCAA Tournament over at Hilton to the Green Bay Phoenix, 71-57. We can pull the graphics up on that one really quick. Really a sloppy game. Both teams, take a look at those first two segments there. Field goal percentage advantage Iowa State.
Sure.
Rebounds, big advantage Iowa State over there, 12. Free throws, pretty even advantage Iowa State. Take a look at that bottom line map.
Yep.
Turnovers, 30. 30 turnovers for Iowa State, only 7 for Green Bay. And that's why Green Bay won 71-57.
Yeah, and those numbers up top are a little bit deceiving. Iowa State kind of came back in that game and hit a few shots late to get the Cyclones within 10 points with about 5-10 minutes left in the game. As you said, those turnovers just killed Iowa State. Got to give credit to Green Bay, though. They played a great game, had a great game plan, really pressured Iowa State when they were coming up the court, did a full-court press on Iowa State, which is something they weren't really used to. So it really put a lot of pressure on them from the very start. Green Bay got out to a nice lead. But Iowa State really, it was an interesting season for them, kind of a roller coaster year for them. Start the Big 12 conference 0-5, lose a couple players this year. Finley's battling his health. For what this team was able to overcome and make the NCAA tournament in the first place, just unbelievable coaching job by Bill Finley. And to me, I think it was a little bit of an unfair matchup for Iowa State. Coming in as the 10 seed in this tournament, I think that was probably fair. But for Green Bay to get a 7, they were 30-1 coming into that game.
10 in the nation.
10 in the nation. They're coming out of the Horizon League, which isn't a very well-respected conference. 30-1, winners of the Horizon League, only had one loss. I think it was to Detroit all year, who they beat in the championship game of the Horizon League. So it was a great team in Green Bay, and you got to give them a lot of credit. But I think it was a little bit of an unfair match for Iowa State. And they had the home court advantage, so you thought that might be on their side. But Green Bay fans were loud as heck down at Hilton Coliseum.
A lot of Cyclone fans did come out to support Iowa State. But like you said, Green Bay, a very solid basketball team, 30-1 on the year, number 10 of the season. They did go on to lose to Kentucky last night. Which
was a great game. They were trailing by about 15 at halftime and came all the way back to tie it up.
So Kentucky moving into the Sweet 16 of the women's basketball tournament. Let's touch on Iowa State and that great season they did have.
Sure.
And none of it would have been possible without junior Chelsea Poppins.
Yeah, absolutely. Poppins was the rock this year, averaging 14 points, 10 rebounds, averaging that double-double. First team All Big 12 this year, well-deserved out of her, shooting 50%. Didn't see a lot of shots out of her from the field, but she was a dominant presence when it came to those layups and just feeding her down low. She was really, really solid this year. Yeah, and you said without her, this team's nowhere, because we saw a lot of struggles from this team shooting this year, and they really lived and died, just like the men's team from the from beyond three-point arc. Saw players like Lauren Mansfield, Brynn Williamson, when they struggled, they really looked at Chelsea Poppins, but she can't do everything for this team. And also, as we've been talking about here throughout the past weeks, Hallie Christopherson really emerging later in the season. Didn't have a great start, but so that kind of contributed to that 0-5 start to the Big 12.
Like you said, Hallie Christopherson did get her stuff together, really was the leading scorer for Iowa State. In that loss to Green Bay, she had 12 points, go along with 8 boards, and really kept Iowa State in it, along with Brynn Williamson off the bench. The only Cyclone player off the bench to score, and she put up 8 points it was. So Iowa State, they got great play, made their runs like you expected them to do, just not enough to get over the hump, excuse me. So this year's over. Probably a year Bill Finley really wanted to get behind him. He needs a chance to get healthy, come back, and have a strong season next year. You are losing point guard Lauren Mansfield and Chastity Cole, but you got some talented freshmen coming in as well. What's Iowa State really got to do in the offseason to improve for next year?
Well, they just lost Jack Easley as their assistant coach last year, so that's the first thing they got to do is find a new assistant coach to replace them. But, as you said, I think Poppins is going to be a senior next year, which is going to be key for this team. I think she's going to be a lot like that Kelsey Bolte player, not as a shooter, but down low, as a big presence down low. I think, as you said, Brynn Williamson, don't want her to have that Hallie Christopherson sophomore slump. Really going to need to have her come out on fire to start next season. The team doesn't really gain a lot of post presence. Anna Prinz will be another girl that's in there as going to be a senior. She's going to have to be huge, as you said. It battled a few injuries this year coming into this season. Last year battled a few injuries, so she's going to need to stay healthy, maybe get a little bit stronger down low. And I think another player you're going to want to keep an eye on is Amanda Zimmerman, the girl out of Huxley, who didn't play a lot this year, but I think that she's going to have a key part in next year's team. She was a great shooter, and she also is about 6 foot tall, so she's got a little bit of a post presence. So she's a really key factor in this team, I think.
And not only putting in the minutes next year, but also the practice minutes this year. She's going to be the player that makes Chelsea Poppins better, makes Anna Prince down low better. And that's exactly where these girls need to grow. Chelsea Poppins has got it. I think Anna Prince needs to get tougher down low. I mean, she has a huge height advantage over almost anybody she plays, minus Brittany Griner maybe. But she's going to have a huge presence, and she's really, I think, the key staple to what this Iowa State women's basketball team is going to be like next year.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of the Big 12 teams realized was that Chelsea Poppins was their go-to player, so they double-team her, which really freed up a lot of the court for Iowa State. But when Iowa State isn't hitting those shots, that's when they're losing these games, and that's what we saw against Green Bay. Really, Chelsea Poppins wasn't a key factor in that game, didn't do a whole lot. But, you know, you're going to need players to step up, and I think that players will do that. As you said, got a few incoming freshmen this year that it's going to help. One out of Mason City that's going to be pretty big.
A long offseason awaiting both the men's and women's basketball team. Lucky enough, the NCAA tournament is still going on, and spring football started to get a lot of Cyclone fans turning their attention to the gridiron. So we'll take a look at the NCAA tournament, the Sweet 16. We'll give you our Final Four picks, as well as touch on spring football. Stay tuned. You're watching Cyclone InCyders. And welcome back to Cyclone InCyders alongside Matt Van Winkle. Going to take a quick look at the NCAA tournament. We're down to the Sweet 16 at the beginning of the weekend. 64 teams vying for a national championship. Now there's 16. And it didn't come without a little bit of excitement. All four number one seeds did make it to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2009. Syracuse struggled with UNC Asheville. A couple questionable calls. We won't go into that. But the number two seeds weren't so lucky. And finally, we can stop seeing those Iowa State Hampton highlights about the last number two seed knocked off back in 2001. Duke goes down to Lehigh, and Big 12 champion Missouri, probably the biggest surprise of the tournament. I know in our bracket I had them winning it all. So
Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, not the best pick right there as they go down to Norfolk State. But anyway, what does that say about that parity of the NCAA tournament?
Well, back-to-back games, the number two seed goes down. That's just unbelievable that happened to me. No one sees these upsets coming. I mean, I think I had, in one of my brackets, I rolled dice and I had Norfolk State winning. But that's just how random it could be, you know. No one picks these games and no one sees it. I had Missouri going to the Final Four. And from what we saw Missouri do against Iowa State this year, I had nothing was telling me to get, putting my mind against it. I thought Missouri was for sure a Final Four team. Really athletic. And I didn't think Norfolk State would be able to run with those guys, but they sure did.
And then you see Norfolk State just get demolished by a Florida team who's coming in as a 7 seed. The highest seed going into the Sweet 16 will be 13 seeded Ohio. So now that your bracket's all covered in red marks and everything, and now you know who the Sweet 16 is, who's your Final Four?
Well, you know, I had Florida State in the Final Four as well as Missouri, KU, and Kentucky, or Kansas and Kentucky. But my Final Four right now is looking like Kentucky still in the tournament, Kansas still in the tournament, lucky for me. I'm looking at Ohio State, though, in that Northeast region, and Michigan State down in the Southwest region. So it's going to be an interesting matchup, though. It's a lot of 1 and 2 seeds, which, you know, typically you think, okay, that's fair. And it looks like that might be the case this year. What's your Final Four looking like?
My Final Four is a little bit different. I still got my underdog pick right now. I like the Louisville Cardinal, kind of picking up on what UConn did last year coming out of the Big East. One thing I noticed, you don't have a Big East school in your Final Four. 2 Big Ten schools. I got Ohio State along with you, Kentucky. And I like North Carolina down there. They might not have their point guard this season, or this coming week, excuse me. But I think they're going to be able to get by Ohio U. And then that'll give him time to rest come Sunday afternoon. I think they do. Roy Williams takes him to the Final Four, eventually knocking off his former team, Kansas, in the Elite Eight. So it's going to be really interesting to see. But then I got that Kentucky-Louisville matchup, old rivalry heading into the championship game.
That'd be interesting,
You know, we'll see. It's going to be tough. You know, all 4 number 1 seeds might get knocked out this week.
And you talk about UNC maybe losing their point guard in Kendall Marshall. That really brings up another good point, that another good game. We saw Creighton UNC play. We talked about them in previous Insiders, and that was a great game. It was good to see a couple of my buddies, Doug and Harrison, going after it there. But I think if Kendall Marshall doesn't play, Harrison Barnes is really going to need to step up for North Carolina in that game.
We saw your Final Four here before we hit one last break, and we'll talk Iowa State spring football. Out of your Final Four, who comes away with the trophy at the end of the year?
I like Kentucky. I've liked them since the beginning of the tournament, so I'm going to stick with it.
You know, I got to agree with you. I think it's going to be hard for any team to beat Kentucky, especially if they play like they played against Ohio State. Or Iowa State, excuse me. I like Kentucky playing Ohio State in the national championship. So
fair enough. One
last quick break here on Cyclone InCyders. We'll be right back after this to talk Iowa State spring football. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Thanks for joining us again tonight. One last quick segment here before we call it a night, Matt. Football right around the corner. A lot of Cyclone fans turning their attention to the gridiron coming up. Long summer ahead before we get there. But Pro Day was today. And Iowa State, I know you were there today.
Yep.
Iowa State probably has two guys that for sure are going to get on a team this year, Leonard Johnson and KO.
I wasn't at Pro Day. I was at spring practice. We'll talk about a little bit later. But our buddy Dan Tracy's been doing a great job covering Leonard Johnson and KO. He went down to the Combine, really scouting these guys hard. You can check out his stuff at the IowaStateDaily.com, but really doing a great job. Leonard Johnson really improved his 40 time today. I think he brought it up 0.2 seconds, so really doing a good job to improve his draft stock. I believe there was about 29 NFL scouts there today, and even the GM of the Packers was there to watch these guys perform. But 11 Iowa State players worked out today in front of those NFL scouts. In my opinion, I think Leonard and KO are probably the only two that are probably going to be drafted. I think a couple other guys might make camps. What do you think?
You know, I agree. I think Taron Benton really has a good chance to make a camp. He's one of those hard-nosed kids that's really going to put everything out there.
Had that big pick against Oklahoma State.
Big pick against Oklahoma State. Big picks to end the Texas Tech game, I think it was, too.
Yep.
Took it back to the 1 yard line there. So he's another guy I think will make a team. Also, Jacob Latimer. He's a hard-nosed guy as well. Yeah. I think he'll make a camp, and then who knows, maybe a guy like Hayworth Hicks or somebody gets a chance. And that's all these guys need is really a chance, and then they can really prove themselves.
And it's been a while since Iowa State has had this amount of players being recognized to be considered for the NFL draft.
And exactly. But now let's turn our attention to the kids that will be coming back wearing the Cardinal gold on Jack Trice in Saturdays. A new look conference. So these kids are really going to be playing West Virginia for the first time alongside TCU. Obviously, the big question is who's going to be taking these snaps for the Cyclones. Jared Barnett replaces Steele Jance in the middle of the season, then Steele Jance replaces Jared Barnett in the Pinstripe Bowl. I almost said Inside Bowl there. But then you got another kid coming up who's making a lot of noise, and Sam Richardson.
Absolutely.
So what did you see today?
Well, Tom Herman really talked up the Sam Richardson kid, and from what I saw from him today, it's only the first practice, but from what I saw, he made very accurate passes, had got a great arm. He's only a sophomore this year. I think he's got a shot to maybe be that backup. But to me, I think Jared Barnett's probably going to be the starter coming out of spring. Paul Rhodes said today to the media that he thinks this is his most talented team coming into this spring, but it's really up to what they do on the field and how they come into that first game, how well they prepare this offseason. But I think Barnett's the guy for quarterback, and really he's going to need to become familiar with these new wide receivers that are coming in, a couple new junior college transfers, a couple of freshmen coming in this year. So it's going to be an interesting season, but my pick is Barnett. I think that he's going to be the guy. Really didn't see a lot out of Steele Jance last year to make me think that he's going to be the starter coming into this season. Really didn't have a great performance in the Pinstripe Bowl, but it was interesting. What do you think? What do you think is going to win that quarterback?
I agree with you. I think when they take the field for the first game against Western Illinois, it will be Jared Barnett. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Richardson maybe coming in the second, third game.
Keep him on the radar,
Keep him on the radar. I think Steele Jance, I think he's a pretty solid number 2, number 3 quarterback. I don't think he'll be the starter opening day. But let's take a look at the other side, defensive side. Sure. That's probably where the strength of this football team is with A.J. Klein, Jake Knott, two of the best 2 linebackers in the Big 12. But you're losing a lot of guys in the secondary. We mentioned Leonard Johnson, Taron Benton, Jeremy Reeves. Jeremy Reeves leaving. Jacquez Washington coming back.
Sure.
What's Iowa State going to do in the secondary?
Well, as you mentioned, they've got a couple guys leaving. You got Leonard Johnson, who was really that rock for the corners last year. Taron Benton's not going to be there this year. So I think they got a guy named Cliff Stokes, who's a junior college transfer, who's a guy that's going to play the corner, who's going to need to do a great job. He's got a little bit of height, got a little bit of athleticism behind him, but I think could really help him. And as we know, these receivers in the Big 12 are pretty tall. We saw Justin Blackman come into Ames last year. Leonard Johnson shut him down. So I think Cliff Stokes is a guy you're going to want to keep an eye out for coming into spring practice and into the season.
Also, defensive line, a lot of people to replace. Jacob Latimer, Patrick Neal, Steven Rumpelheimer. A lot of guys that are going to need to be replaced. Wally Burnham, he's going to find enough guys. He's going to have another hard-nosed defense coming in to spring ball.
One thing you also want to note coming into this spring is that Jerome Tiller, former Iowa State quarterback, is now listed as the third-string wide receiver. So that's another guy I didn't mention, another receiver in that arsenal this year. Got a lot of receivers returning, though. You got Albert Gary, Josh Lenz coming back. Aaron Horn. A lot of guys that, did a lot last year, but we're going to need to see more of them coming.
And remember last time a quarterback went to receiver, Phillip Bates.
Sure.
Had a pretty big catch to beat Iowa in that 5-field goal game. Yeah. Gene Chizik probably his only real win as an Iowa State Cyclone.
Those last Chizik recruits are out of here now, too. So
we're out of time here on Cyclone InCyders. We'll be back again next Tuesday night at 8:30. Once again, want to thank everybody behind the cameras and behind the scenes. Couldn't do it without them. So for Matt Van Winkle, I'm Aaron Bauer. Have a good night.